It was hell. I couldn't believe that my mom had died in this very intense, dramatic fashion.
How are you feeling now?
I still have serious PTSD from that. Remember my mom without that image popping into my head. We got a call from them and said, there's been a problem. We can't pick up your mom's body. She did not chart that I'd requested morphine. She charted that I requested euthanasia. Put it in quotes. I was terrified that I was about to see someone else I love be killed. I was terrified that a wrong move, anything would spark an alarm. When those charges are dismissed, the only thing you learn is the tumor won't kill you, but you still have a huge tumor that's like leaking trauma and pain. It's still scarring you, just seeping.
My next guest lived through the exact nightmare end-of-life caregivers fear most, being punished for showing up for a dying patient. In July 2023, Rachel Waters gave her dying mother, Marsha Foster, a dose of morphine from a hospice comfort kit following instructions from a hospice nurse after staff at the memory care facility refused to do it themselves. Marsha died moments later. 18 months on, Rachel was indicted for malice and felony murder, a case that only fell apart after the medical examiner reversed the cause of death to undetermined. Charges were dropped in August 2025. She was cleared, however. She lost close to $500,000, and she says she lost her career. Now she's advocating for Marsha's Law, a law that would require signed authorization for family members administering comfort kit medication from all hospices. Rachel, welcome to the show. Welcome. Another episode of Healthcare Stories with Healthcare Henry. Now, this is by far the most asked about thing that we've looked into, and I personally sought out Rachel for this myself. I was one of those people that said, she's interesting, her story is interesting, but I really wanted to get to know the life of her mother and what that was like. So Rachel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to really have you here. I'm more interested because, of course, I own a hospice, but for me, I really want to know who you are, right? What was life like growing up in Georgia? Kind of give me some background on who you are so we know who we're actually talking to.
Yeah. So I spent the first 29 years of my life off of a dirt road in rural Georgia. I lived out in the county, place called Harlem, Georgia.
Okay.
It's funny because I moved to New York City 15 years ago, and Harlem, Georgia is actually named for Harlem, New York.
Really?
So it's the strangest thing. They actually moved a house from Harlem, New York to Harlem, Georgia, establishing the town. And so it was kind of a weird little twist of fate that I ended up here. But, I grew up in a very tight knit, very deeply Christian family. So I grew up with my grandparents right next door, and my mom and my dad out in the middle of the woods. So only child, grew up fishing, hunting, getting, deep in the swamps. And I was very close to my grandparents, and especially my mom too. Things were a little more difficult with my father, but my mom and I were always very tight. She was a satellite communications engineer for the federal government, but she had been an English teacher for a time when she was younger. She was an artist, a painter, and we shared that in common. I started writing when I was very young, and so we both, had this deep love of literature and poetry and art and nature. She was a painter for Ducks Unlimited and Audubon Nature Society. So I got to grow up with this very rich environment, not just, being out in the woods and being with family and my community, but also with art and literature. And my mom was a huge part of that. And my grandparents were my maternal grandparents. So I was really close to them. I was also a weird kid, right? I did not know at the time that I was autistic. And so I was the kid who was always asking questions, which in the South, especially as a woman, you're kind of meant to be quiet and obey and not push outside the lines too much. But I was somebody who was always wanting to understand my world more, learn more, interrogate, like, why is this thing the way it is? And so my father perceived that as super disobedient, and so did other extended members of my family, like my aunts and uncles. And so there was sort of a tension in the family early on where I was sort of seen as the darling of my mom and grandparents, but the rest of my family, including my father, was like, well, she's a disobedient brat who's defiant and who doesn't, listen. And that tension sort of carried over all the way to, when I was 11, and I was the weird kid who read the entire Encyclopedia Britannica when I was 8 years old. and um and I decided, that I was no longer going to be a Christian, that I was a Buddhist, and that
Okay.
created huge waves with my family.
In the Bible Belt, I can imagine.
Yeah, and especially with an evangelical family.
Okay.
My mom and my grandparents were more traditional First Christian. They were a little more open minded, but the other family members started to kind of fear that I had gone the way of the devil, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that sort of was
I
the beginning of the rift. Yeah,
and how old were you at that time?
I was 11.
So 11 years old. So up until then, you and I can really speak to this. I can tell you because I have the same diagnosis, right? Do you and growing up, I'm 38.
Yeah,
They called me a problem child, defiant.
the
It
words.
wasn't
Yes.
those were the words, right? Because
Yep.
they didn't have the information, like the whole thing about autism or what they call
Mhm.
now as being on the spectrum, that didn't really exist
Right.
back then. And especially for me, I was born in Atlanta, but grew up in Chicago, so we weren't even getting tested for that stuff.
Yep.
So I definitely understand that, and it's interesting because my mother also was a English school teacher,
Huh?
right? So
Yeah.
my mother recognized it in a different way and had to tryna love on me a certain way,
Mhm.
because there was a lot of things that she understood that other people just didn't get.
Yep. Yeah, my mom always knew who, she said, even though you talk back and you're
Yeah.
disobedient, she said, I know how
Uh-huh,
loving you are, how caring you
uh-huh.
are.
And then one of the things too, right? So I'm looking at you now and I'm just curious. I see pink hair, right? It's like
Yeah.
that's something like where does that come from? Is that that's just who you are? What is that about?
Well, it's definitely just who I am, but pink has always been my favorite
Okay.
color. Which is really funny because I'm pretty gender nonconforming in most
Okay.
ways. But uh, when I was a little kid, it's kind of one of the few homages to my childhood home where I grew up. We grew up in the woods with wild azaleas everywhere, and they were pink. They were this
Oh,
particular shade of pastel pink, and when I was a little kid, I just thought it was the most beautiful color, most beautiful thing in the world. And so I started wearing a lot of pink. And then by the time I was in my 30s, I had black hair for a while. I've always been kind of a weird goth kid, but pink was still my favorite color, even with the all black, right? So I usually had some pink in some way on me. But when I was in my 30s, I was like, oh, I can't do this black hair anymore. It's too harsh. So I went pink and kind of didn't look back. It's been lavender at times, but I always keep coming back to pink. It's my favorite. And my mom, it's funny, like as alternative and weird as I was, my family, my mom always was really amused and loved my sense of style
yeah.
because she's an
Yeah,
artist.
right.
So um, I was really lucky. You were asking about my childhood. I was really lucky to have a very supportive
Yeah.
mom and really supportive grandparents, and that was one reason we were so close. But my grandparents died when I was 17 and 20,
Yeah.
respectively. My mom and I were caregivers to my grandmother before she passed. She had pretty advanced diabetes. Um, and so we would trade off. I stayed home to go to university locally so I could help care for her and give her insulin injections and fix her meals. And then my mom, when she got off work, would come and take over and help care for my grandma. And so my mom also did the dual caregiving thing. And even after my grandmother passed, we just stayed super close. It's one reason it took me so long to leave rural Georgia, even though there were better job opportunities. My marriage at the time was kind of falling apart. Looking at broader
Yeah.
horizons, and I'd been traveling to New York for work. And I knew I wanted to be here, but leaving was really hard because my mom and I saw each other literally every day when I lived in Georgia.
You said something that's super interesting, and I think it's gonna speak to who you are, right? And so I wanna make sure that people really understand this. You said you stayed home to go to university or to go to school so that you can be a part of the caregiving for your grandmother.
I
How
did.
did you make that
Yeah.
decision at 18, 17, 18? What was going through your head?
Man, I had applied all the way. I applied at Carnegie here. I had applied at Emory, and I was accepted to Carnegie, but I realized that my grandmother was probably nearing the end of her
Mhm.
life, especially after my granddad died. My grandmother was like my best friend. I
Mine too.
already like hung out with her
Yeah.
every day after school. And after my granddad died, it was just like a no-brainer for me. I knew I could get a good education locally at Augusta University. And it was an easy decision, like, of course I'm going to stay and see my grandmother every day.
Yeah.
I didn't even second guess it. That's just what you did.
There's also something else that's interesting is because while you also sacrificed, your mother was a part of what we call now the sandwich generation. So she was raising a child and taking care of her parents at the same time. Did she
She
sacrifice a
was.
lot to do that as well? And does any of that kind of make who you are in terms of being this super caregiver?
Oh my God. Yeah. My mom, one of the reasons I was so close to my mom was with the difficulties of her marriage falling apart. There were a lot of custody battles. It was very contentious with my father. My mom nearly went bankrupt trying to fight for keeping me at home where I wanted to be with her.
Is that a
Keeping me,
custody battle, you mean?
yeah, custody battles. You know, really she sacrificed so much in terms of all of her savings, all of her income, any kind of travel that she was going to do. That all went into shoring up my future and making sure there was enough for me to go to university if I didn't get scholarship. I did get Hope Scholarship, fortunately.
Congratulations.
Um, thanks. Yeah. Um, but she made so many sacrifices that even later in life I did not learn until, like, for instance, I always wondered, Mom, why didn't you get remarried? Because she had a ton. My mom was gorgeous and she
Oh.
had a lot of people who were interested in her. And she would kind of date someone a little bit here and there and then just kind of like taper off. And then I later learned, I was like, why didn't you ever get remarried? And she said, I never wanted anyone to sort of compete with you for what you might inherit. I wanted to be sure you'd be taken care of after I died. And I was really floored by that. I actually wish she hadn't. I would have so preferred my mom. I think her outcomes would have been so much better if she hadn't been alone. And I lost everything anyway. um, but she, she made tremendous sacrifices because she wanted to ensure I had the very best um, and was taken care of. And she'd seen a lot of the difficulties with my marriage. She had been through two rough marriages herself.
Yeah.
And I think the last thing she wanted was for me to ever struggle. It was really important to her.
I still really don't I wanna be the one to really picture this for people, like, I wanna paint this for people. You come from a family of love, admiration, and the ability and to sacrifice or willingness to sacrifice whatever for one another. Schooling, love life even, right? And to your point, we know this now, being with someone, being in love, it doesn't have to be marriage, but a partnership can extend life. Your mother sacrificed
Yeah.
all of that for you, right? This is how you grew up. So as you go through this now, and even if you had I'm assuming you had a marriage that didn't work out at the time as well. What was some of her advice to you at that time, being as someone who went through something similar?
Oh man, my mom's advice to me is never depend on a man or anybody else for your survival. It
Survival or
was,
happiness or both?
I don't know if my mom actually thought about happiness as much as she should have.
Mm,
Um, she would often disregard her own happiness, which
you
I really
sacrifice it.
struggled
Yeah.
with. And uh and part of what makes our story so bittersweet is she got sick right as I reached the point in my life where I was in a position to repay her and spoil her for everything she had given me growing up. I finally had I was divorced, but in a great, stable relationship to my now husband. I had a great career. I'd finished grad school. I found my footing financially and socially. And, I was in my, mid 30s and I was ready to take my mom traveling to places that she'd
Yes,
always wanted to
yes,
go
yes.
and repay her for everything. And she was just like in her late 60s. So there was no reason to believe at the time that we didn't have that time.
Yeah.
And the fact that she got sick right as that was due to happen is part of why this story in particular is so heartbreaking for me, because there were just so many unrealized dreams I had for giving my mom that happiness that she so richly deserved, but was always delaying for herself.
How did you know she was sick? What did you notice?
Oh man. I had a little premonition that she might eventually go down the Alzheimer's
Okay.
path when I took a 23andMe test in 2017, and it showed positive for the ApoE4
Yeah.
Alzheimer's
Mhm.
gene,
Mhm.
right? And I knew I've always been very deeply interested in medicine, in part because I was a caregiver to my grandpa. So I researched everything
Mm,
I
yeah.
could, got medical textbooks, you name it. Um, but I was aware of the gene and its
Mhm.
implications. And I suddenly remembered a story that my grandmother always told me about how my mom's great grandmother had senile dementia and couldn't remember her son, which was my
Yeah.
grandfather. And I realized, oh my God, I think I inherited the gene from mom. And so I encouraged mom to get the test too. And sure enough, she had a copy of ApoE4. And at that point, your mom is nearing her 70s. I also knew she had a TBI from when a drunk driver, ran her into a tree at 20 and she was in a coma.
I'm
So that
sorry.
was another huge risk
Sure.
factor. So I was very afraid I had been cruising along previously of like my mom being the healthiest person in the family. She looked really abnormally young for her age. She was active and energetic. And I had sort of taken for granted that seeming youthfulness is, oh, my mom's going to live to 100. Like, I'm going to have plenty of time. And I suddenly sensed that maybe it would all come crashing down sooner than I'd hoped. But things kind of chugged along in a normal trajectory. You notice like little weird blips here and there, but you don't want to assign too much to them or else you just become consumed by
Yeah.
worry until the pandemic hit. And when everything locked down and my mom became incredibly socially isolated, like her sister who lived next door, they wouldn't even like see each other
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
yard because everyone was afraid, like, does it transmit outside? So my mom is radically alone in this house in the middle of the woods now for months. And all of a sudden, all of her text messages to me, they become super garbled, lots of misspellings, lots of grammatical errors. And I realized then, oh my God, it's happening, because it was so striking. It was a night and day difference from how my mom was communicating even just a few months prior.
Interesting. And so at what point do you say to yourself, "Okay, I need to move mom into a facility?" Like, what does that look like?
Oh, that came much later because first I got down there with my husband to kind of assess her, and in person she was still super functional.
Right.
My mom had a rare variant of Alzheimer's, primary progressive aphasia, where actually her ability to speak and articulate and read went long before her memory or executive
Right.
function.
Mhm.
Right, so she would verbally seem much worse off than she was. Like she was still able to do like advanced mathematical tax calculations even in that first year and do them correctly, but she couldn't spell
Got
anymore.
you. Yep. Got you.
And and I had taken her to a geriatrician who said, she sounds worse and seems worse than she is, but she still has mild cognitive impairment. But yes, I think you're on the Alzheimer's trajectory. She also had really advanced osteoporosis, so her whole spinal column had collapsed. So it was a lot of pain and inflammation too, and trying to determine like how much of that is causing cognitive impairment.
Mhm.
But basically, we've been told to expect like a years and years long trajectory, 8 to 10 years, sort of the typical Alzheimer's trajectory from mild cognitive
Correct.
impairment.
Correct. Correct.
Unfortunately, that wasn't the case because my mom, little did we know, also, we didn't know this at the time, had smoldering multiple myeloma. So that was creating a whole new host of cognitive and physical issues and inflammation, which matters a lot for brain health, right? Um, and she was declining. She started declining at such a rapid rate that within the span of 3 years, we went from her being able to live totally independently, but with me coming down like every 6 weeks to spend time with her, and see how she is and just be with her. At that point, my career and my marriage, I could not upend and move my life down
Right.
there at that point. Um, And she also didn't want that. My mom was super independent and she kind of wanted to continue to live independently. She also did not want to move to New York.
That's typical. I mean, it's cold, right?
It is. It is.
Bridget,
And
yeah.
and I respected that. And she wanted to be close to her
Yeah.
siblings, which, I get. Like her sister still lived next door. Like, why is she going to want to move to like an apartment in a city that she doesn't like,
Mhm.
you
I
know?
understand that.
But within that span of 3 years, by the time she was diagnosed formally with multiple myeloma in summer of 2022, and then by the time we got into the fall, she needed in-home care that was basically almost 24/7.
How'd you pay
It
for
was
that?
very rare.
How'd
Hmm?
you pay for that?
My income completely went to her care. It was $15,000 a month. My husband supported me while my entire income plus what we had from her retirement pay, we were able to, because I have power of attorney too, we were able to barely scrape by and fund her in-home care. But yeah, I was paying a staff of 3 people full
Oh,
time.
I am very aware, and honestly, 15,000 a month is on the low end, right? So for
It is.
24/7 care, you're looking anywhere from 27 to $36,000 a month is normally what you're looking for.
That's right.
Um,
Well, we also, mind you, we would relieve them for many nights and sometimes like a week at a
right,
time where we would rotate.
right.
And so that was how we would do that cost saving.
S So at that point
Um,
then oh, go ahead.
but by the time we got to February of 2023, her dementia had advanced so much that the house itself was no longer a safe place for her,
Right.
just in terms of corners or a step.
Mhm.
And you couldn't update or modify that house fast enough or comprehensively enough
Understood.
to make it a safe place for her. And especially when you start dealing with a lot of incontinence and you have a lot of upholstered furniture,
Mhm.
you start getting health hazards even. And so this promise I'd made to her to keep her at home, I quickly realized was not realistic because, man, Alzheimer's just catches you off guard in ways you can't even conceive until you're in it, right?
You did.
And
You did. No, you're right.
we realized that it would be much safer to move her into a memory care facility, one that was nearby so her siblings could still visit because they wouldn't be able to come to New York. But I knew that I'd be able to get down there often or spend months at a time, even, on family medical leave, which I ended up taking a lot of family medical leave, which thank God we have in New York. And she also needed to be in a place where I think she was familiar with the people, the culture, the environment. I don't think she would have been able to transition as easily. Like
Mhm.
also taking her on a flight to New York City at that
It's a
stage of
lot.
dementia,
It's a
good
lot
Lord,
for her and for you.
just wasn't happening. Yeah, it was not going to be good for
Mhm.
anybody. So we got her a beautiful, large, we got her the biggest private room. It's basically an L-shaped studio apartment in this memory care facility, decorated it to look identical to her home.
Brilliant. I
And
love that. Brilliant. Brilliant. Who told you to
and
do that?
and she just I just intuited that that would be the least
Genius.
disruptive. Yeah.
Genius. I love that.
And it worked because most of the time she believed
She was
she
at
was at
home.
home. Now,
I love
mind you,
that.
when she was at home, she already didn't recognize herself being at
Yes.
home
Yes.
some anyway. But there were times that she would sit there and say, this is a beautiful house,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yes.
Mother and
I
daddy built
loved
it. And we
it.
were like, that's right.
Yes.
you
I
know?
love that. Same furniture, everything.
That's right.
I
Same furniture,
love
same decor scheme. We moved all her art, her like her upholstery and furnishings, and just made sure it was as minimally disruptive as. We even made a kitchen area because you can't have a kitchen, but we got
right.
like one of those kitchen islands that had like snacks and kind of replicated the
Yes.
feel that
Yes.
she would have a kitchen.
That is how you move a dementia patient into a new location because we know that they can go down much faster feeling
That's
confused and
right.
frustrated. You did it. You really are caregiver 101, A plus from me. You are awesome.
And I felt like I failed anyway, though, because my mom, between the cancer pain and her type of dementia, had probably the most extensive set of behaviors imaginable. I know she was, in many ways, one of the most difficult patients that the memory care facility had encountered. And And that became a nightmare between, and it became sort of a tug of war between me and the facility, who really wanted her heavily sedated most of the time.
So
And me knowing that that was going to be a huge fall risk, also knowing that I was able to calm her down with behavioral interventions, and knowing that behavioral interventions were the most optimal approach for dementia patients, and also seeing a lot of the current literature on how many antipsychotics are radically inappropriate for people with dementia,
mm,
plus knowing that she had cancer that created bone lesions. It was
yep,
incredibly
yeah,
painful, and behaviors are often a response for
yeah,
that. So it became like this battle between, no, I don't want you to sedate my mom into oblivion. She needs more appropriate medications that for both managing her pain, and more appropriate behavioral interventions. And so I started coming down there a lot.
what's a
And
lot?
that also created tension. At one point, they even said, "You visit too much.
They did not
You
say
maybe
that.
should."
No, they didn't, Rachel.
They did. They said, "Maybe you're upsetting her and shouldn't come down as often,"
I
which was really,
yeah,
alarming to
as it
me.
should be. Mhm.
And unfortunately, by that point, my mom had started advancing so rapidly toward death. She'd already been on hospice since December of 2022. But at that point, she'd lost an additional 20 pounds. She was like whittled down to like, from my mom at her healthy weight was 130 pounds. At this point, she's around 80, 82 pounds.
Okay, hold on a second. Hold on a
Um,
second, because I missed that part. So from now, December of 2022 till Imma call it July of
now we're looking at April, May, right? This is leading to her decline. My mom, just going into memory care alone, had lost like another 20
okay.
pounds. And that was partly because she would only drink Soylent
Yeah.
drinks. She didn't really eat
I
anymore.
I'm not someone who's and my perspective is gonna be different because 'cause I'm on the hospice end, so it's a little different, right? I look at it as whatever they take is better than nothing, and
It's better than nothing.
I drink Soylent. I mean, literally, it's relatively
Yeah,
nutritious, it has vitamins, it works.
that's
This
right.
is not a paid promotion, by the way, I actually do drink that, so I
It
gen
was one of the
yeah,
fixed calorie things we could find too.
I love
Yeah,
it for seniors, and I think too, it's not as heavy as some of your other drinks that they have out there on the market, like, that are pretty
it's
so
not.
it works for them. I like
And
that.
it did work to a degree, except the cancer was advancing. She had failed treatment back in December. She had just been, we didn't get her on chemo for multiple myeloma. We did get her on the biologic therapy because that's a lot gentler. It's a lot easier to tolerate, in hopes that it would buy her maybe some meaningful quality of life for a few months, which maybe it did, maybe it didn't. It didn't seem to impair her quality of life, I'll say that. Um, but that cancer and dementia was going to progress hand in hand anyway, and it did. And as it progressed, those behaviors got worse and worse. And as the behaviors got worse, the tensions would flare between me and the facility. Like, I remember one time my mom threw Soylent at one of the aides, and I got a call while I was back in New York, and they were like, "She ruined this aide's shoes. What are you going to do about it?" And I'm like, "I don't know. Do you want me to buy new shoes? Like, what do you want me to do about it?" She's like, "We're just asking you, what are you going to do about it?" And they would like yell at me on the phone. And I was like, man, I'm sitting here thinking, I'm going to move her to a different facility is what I'm going to do about it. But then when we went down to try and move her, they were like, "She's going to die and rapidly deteriorate if you move her." And I knew that that wasn't untrue, right? That was likely to be the case. And so we, they'd already mandated us to have an outside caregiver for a couple of weeks after they alleged that she had attempted suicide. But my mom often yelled that she was going to kill
Wait a
herself
minute,
because
did she actually try it or did she just say it?
she said it. And then they sent her to the geriatric psych ER, where she languished for many, many, many hours until I learned about it and got a friend to go pick her up, because the memory care facility would not pick people up from the ER.
S
And
I understand that part though from their vantage point, but what I'm struggling
I mean, it's a liability
yeah,
thing, I get it,
but
but
I'm struggling
it was very bad for her.
it is, but some of it for where what I'm struggling the most is you put her in this facility, you trust the facility to take care of your mom, right? You're
Yeah,
not even in town, right? We're putting her here so that you guys can take care of her, and they know that she has dementia going into it,
and they knew she had
and they knew
behaviors. I'd already warned them about
They
that.
they knew she and even if they didn't know that, they knew that that was a possibility and it could come as the diagnosis progressed, right? So they should have known that. For me, I'm
Yeah.
just wondering where was the lack of compassion and empathy, and the way that they're calling you is like, for me, that doesn't work for me, right? I'm not happy with that.
We were pretty
Yeah,
concerned.
it
Uh, yeah, I had even reported them to the ombudsman's office because they threatened to kick her out with less than 24 hours notice at one point. And that was, I after they had mandated that caregiver additional caregiver at cost to me too. So I was back up to $15,000 a month, right?
wait a second. Hold on, Rachel. So you put her into a memory care facility, right? And then they tell you that you have to have a extra caregiver there?
Or else they'll kick her out.
I have another question just to make sure, because I wanna make sure that whatever I say, I'm have the right information. So this memory
Hmm.
care, normally, most of them in Georgia are gonna be ratio-wise 1 to 8, right? But at what
Yeah,
point
usually.
was she already on hospice?
She was already there when she was on hospice when she entered memory care.
She was on hospice at home, then she goes into the facility.
She sure
Now I
was.
have to go back another
That's
step. Got you. The facility that you found, how did you find it?
I found them because we had toured multiple facilities and it seemed to be the one that had the appearance and the staff and the temperament of the residents that appeared most compatible with my mom
Got you.
and the least likely to disrupt. But it was the most expensive and it was, rather than having the hospital like lighting, it had like the warm lamps and interior light that I felt would be minimally disruptive to my mom.
I agree, and so then at this point, she goes in, she's already on hospice, and the same hospice continues care in that facility. No dis
They sure did until that alleged suicide attempt, which I'm still not convinced was a suicide
Mhm.
attempt. But I'm not going to, say either way, because they had sent her to the ER twice for alleged suicide attempts, right? And
Who sent her, the facility or the hospice?
the facility did, not hospice. But the facility, when we decided to keep her there, they were like, they had suggested their preferred hospice, us transferring her to their preferred hospice. Um, because, they said, hey, they offer turn down service. We work with them a lot. And at that point, you're trying to like minimize the tensions with the facility too, because they've come to such a fever pitch. And all I'm thinking is, God, I want my mom to be able to live the last months of her life with minimal disruption. So, sure, I will go with your
Okay,
hospice. And
hold on, Rachel, hold on.
it gets real weird
Yeah,
here.
so because now and this is where these are the questions, right? Because now the story is important, but what people don't understand is what got up to the story. So you were already happy with a hospice that you were with from day 1 before you go into the facility.
In general,
And
yeah,
then
they were good.
that you go into the facility, and would you say, and this is just whatever you might think, that by not transferring her to the other hospice, was there any type of hostility that you think you might have had when she was in the facility?
I don't
Okay.
know. I don't know that. And so I just know that the facility director, her mom was with the hospice that she had suggested to me
Her mom was on that
and
service.
was on that same
Okay.
hospice. Yeah. And so they had a very close relationship. And at the time, I'm thinking, okay, this is great. My mom, so this was the weirdest part about it. And this regards the comfort care kit. And it's one reason why I'm putting a pen in this because this is where Marsha's law comes in. So when my mom went into home hospice in December at her house, I was prescribed the standard. She was prescribed the standard comfort care kit, of course, with me being the one intended to use it, right? Because the nurse is the one who's training me on it. I go to CVS, pick up the kit. The nurse comes and does
Wait a
her
minute.
weekly visit.
Wait a minute, Rachel. I gotta go back
Yep,
another second. This
sure.
comfort kit, you picked it up from CVS?
Sure did. That was they said we're prescribing it to CVS for you to pick up and when you get it, we'll give you the training.
So this was Ativan, morphine, what else is in that
That's
kit?
right. It was like I think it was lorazepam, morphine, suppositories for
Mhm.
constipation, and I think 1 or 2 other medications. I can't, because, barely needed any of them, but this, as far as I knew, was standard practice in Georgia. I had several friends who were hospice nurses, and they were like, "Oh yeah, that's what you're going to do. You're going to pick it up." And I remember at the time going, "This is weird. Like, I'm going to be expected to administer controlled substances at home. Like, do I have any legal protection to do this?" And at the time, everybody kind of assumes, like, well, yeah, you do. Like, hospice is going to instruct you on the use, give you the hotline to call in case they're not available and you need to use these medications in the event of respiratory distress or pain, which was what the sublingual morphine was indicated for. And I didn't think anything of it. They trained me on needing to use it. At this point, my mom's death is assumed to be many months away. So you're not, some people I know go into hospice literally as they're actively dying, and others go into hospice years before they
President
die.
Carter 2
And
years, yep.
so, right. And so you're not thinking of it with that kind of sense of urgency. It just kind of goes in a drawer, right?
One question.
And
I got one question.
yeah.
The morphine that you had,
Mhm.
how was it? Was it in a I'm just keeping it simple. Was it in a bottle?
In a bottle, sublingual dropper. Yep. Just a little dropper
Under
syringe
the
and some
tongue is
pink
how they
liquid
told you to do it?
under the tongue.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's
Okay.
right. And they prescribed it. It didn't need to be refrigerated if it was unopened, it said. And so we put it in a drawer, a secure drawer that my mom never went into, hidden under kind of a false layer box,
Sure.
so she wouldn't get to it,
Okay.
right? And we didn't think about it, except when she changed hospices. So she goes to the memory care facility, and they duplicated all her prescriptions when she went into memory care so that people at the facility could administer them. Because memory care facilities are in an interesting legal designation, at least in Georgia. They're just considered residences. They're not skilled nursing. So they're not a medical facility.
Correct.
They're like an apartment where you pay extra for activities of daily living support. And only a few people there can actually give medications. And they can only give those medications if they're prescribed to the facility by the facility's pharmacy. Doesn't invalidate any prescriptions your loved one has at home. It just means the people in that facility can't give it to them.
More or less, sure.
Yeah. And so, and that's, that's something that, again, we're not thinking, with that comfort kit, we're like, well, they didn't move it to the facility. We just assumed they, at this point, we'd actually kind of forgotten about it in the drawer when she was moved in,
I missed something else.
And you just sort of assume, like, okay, they've duplicated, along with her other prescriptions, they probably duplicated the comfort kit, and you don't think anything of it. However, when she transferred hospices to their preferred hospice, they came to her house to pick up like the toilet risers and the oxygen that they had left there to replace it. It all happened in the span of an hour to replace it with the new hospice company stuff. And I said, well, what about the comfort kit? And the guy goes, has it been used? And I was like, no. And he's like, well, you can just keep it. We don't need to prescribe a new one.
Who was the guy? Who was the guy?
It was just the man who had been sent by hospice to pick everything up.
He picked up
it was just
equipment.
He picked up equipment, and he was picking up anything left behind.
Okay.
And so you're just like, he was like, oh, it's probably been prescribed to the facility, and we're not going to, you don't want to duplicate the prescription. And I was like, okay. So it just stays in the drawer. And you just aren't thinking about it again because you're like, okay, the facility's going to have a prescription when the time comes. And that was the last thing I thought of it until we got the call on July 9th of 2023 that my mom had been found doubled over, non-responsive, with an oxygen saturation in the 70s, fingers and toes turning black. And that new hospice, who'd only been with her about a month at that point, said, she is actively dying and you need to get down here immediately because she has hours, if not, at most days to live. And so we jumped into action.
Mm-hmm.
We could not get a flight out of New York because there was a huge flood storm that came through that shut down all the airports, had like 3 flights canceled. So we ended up the next morning having to take an Amtrak to DC, where we then raced to the airport to get a flight to Augusta, Georgia. When we arrived, my mom, she was non-responsive, except for the fact that when she was turned by memory care staff, she would
In
grimace
pain.
in pain.
Mhm.
And she had two large, either bed sores or Kennedy ulcers, we're not sure, but they were large blistered lesions on her flank and hip, or buttock. So her flank, which is the back of the hip, and buttock. And she essentially looked paralyzed, like she had stiff fingers and toes that wouldn't really
Mhm.
move. And she'd already gone because she had a DNR, and they put her on oxygen. I'm not sure if that was protocol with the DNR, but they put her on oxygen. But even then, her fingers and toes were still black. Her eyes were starting to dry out from the lack of fluids. Her tongue was already cracked and bleeding. And it was very apparent that she was dying, that this was the point of no return. And I even gotten a good friend of mine who's also a hospice nurse and been a good friend for like over 20 years. She was coming and checking on my mom daily too. And was like, yeah, she's really much in the active dying process. She's pretty much fully obtunded. And at that point, when we arrived, seeing the discomfort when she was turned, I asked this new hospice company nurse. Now, this woman I'd never met before, because mind you, I'd only been with this hospice like a
A
month.
month, yeah.
And I had never encountered this nurse before. And I was like, so can we get a comfort kit with like I don't know if you guys do a morphine drip or something, but isn't this the situation it's called for? She has a lot of pain when she's being turned, and
Right.
she's not really receiving any comfort measures beyond an oxygen patch and like little, or not oxygen patch, oxygen tank, and the little swabs that you dip in water to swab the inside of her
Mhm.
mouth. And they said, well, the nurse was like, well, she looks comfortable to me. I don't think she needs it. And I was like, okay. And that seemed a little strange because I'm like, but she's in pain every time she's turned. She's otherwise non-responsive, but like, how is she comfortable with advanced multiple myeloma while it appears her organs are failing and
Sure.
her eyes are dried
Yeah.
out? And so the next day, because we had set up in her room, because she could die at any moment, and I did not want to risk not being there. So my husband and I have a blow up mattress at the foot of her bed in her room, because again, this is a residence. We're paying rent there. We can stay in there,
Sure.
by law,
Especially at that time, sure. Yeah.
especially while someone's
Yeah.
dying. And the next day, she's progressing much more. At this point, her skin is already yellow and kind of waxy to the touch. And again, no response except for this grimace of agony every time she shifted, which is like every 2 hours. And that's a lot, right?
Mhm.
And she's starting to experience more agonal breathing at this time. I had a booklet to recognize agonal breathing where you get the mandibular movement. And it would be intermittent at that time, but it definitely looked like air hunger. And I'm sitting here going, okay, this is exactly what I was trained on for the morphine. Why doesn't she have a prescription here at the facility? So at this point, the nurse, who's only visiting once a day, I confronted her and I was like, look, my mom is entitled to comfort care as she's dying. Why is it being denied? Can we please get it here? And she was still disputing that she felt my mom was comfortable, and she just like shut me down. And it was a very weird interaction. In fact, it was so strange that I ended up recording the interaction because I started to become concerned
Sure.
about maybe inappropriate care. And then I'm also recording my mom as she's dying so I can make the case to them that yes, morphine is necessary. And I knew the purpose of morphine, so I am directly requesting it. And I noticed this nurse responding very strangely to me and my request for morphine. She almost acted like it was like her reaction seemed very anxious and odd. She was like wringing her, she had like a little cross and like ringing around her neck when she was talking. And I was like, what is going on? This is like so strange. This is not a weird request. I'd seen both my grandparents die. They had, adequate comfort care in the hospital.
Mhm.
They had received a morphine drip, and I wanted it to be managed by people in the facility. I did not in any way want morphine prescribed to me
Right.
or to use my comfort
Right.
kit.
Right.
I frankly wanted someone who was more experienced with death and dying and people who were administering meds regularly to manage
Sure.
this. And again, denied. And unfortunately, that night at about 4 in the morning, my husband and I were awakened by the sound of teeth smashing together. It's very intense
Mhm.
sound. And I go to my, and also the sound of
Trouble breathing. She's having respiratory. She's
really
trouble. Yeah.
intense, extreme respiratory
Mhm.
distress. And at that point, I am panicked. I am straight up like, what the hell? This is why I requested morphine. Why is this
Mhm.
happening? And so I run to the charge station. Now, there's no medical staff currently there, right? Because they only work like a 9 to 5, the nurse or anyone who would be there. You have some assistants like aides who can give medications under really narrow circumstances. Again, they don't have prescribing power, they don't have diagnostic power, and they certainly can't give a medication that hasn't been prescribed to the facility. They're like, no, we still don't have morphine, but she sure looks like she needs it, was what one of them said. And at that point, my husband, when he realized we weren't getting the prescription of the facility, was like, I'm going to just go get it from the house and keep it in the car. So in case we need it, we have at least that comfort kit on hand, because thank God we have at least that. And
Now just
he
the
had
10th,
kept it
just the 10th still? The morning of the 10th or the morning of the 11th?
this is the morning of the
Monday of the
12th.
12th.
So we went to bed on the 11th, woke up this has been days, no food, no fluids, progressively waxier, more yellow skin, eyes are completely dried out.
Mhm.
Now it's like a really disturbing thing to see. And no urination, no
Mhm.
defecation. She was very, very advanced in the dying
She was
process.
actively dying is
Uh,
what we would call it, yeah.
she was actively dying even before we
Yeah.
arrived, right? But she was beyond, especially with someone with the DNR, she's not going to get any resuscitative measures. Um, so my husband runs and gets the kit from the car, and I remembered my training, and I was like, okay, I'm assuming it's exact same with this hospice company as the last. This hospice company had also put their emergency hotline on a little magnet on the fridge in my mom's room.
Mhm.
And so I call their emergency hotline at around 6 in the morning. And this is, you know, still, it's been almost 2 hours of this agonal breathing, super distressed breathing. And I call them, no one picks up, but then they call me back on the hotline. And I was like, listen, my mom is in this memory care facility. Nothing's been prescribed at the facility, but I have her comfort kit from home. And I just need to know, like, am I allowed to give it to her even though she's in a memory care facility? And she goes, well, yes, like you're trained on it and that's what's prescribed for. So I don't see why not. And I was like, okay, here are her symptoms. What's the dose? They knew my mom had been on a fentanyl patch. So they said 1 milliliter, which is about 20 milligrams of morphine under the tongue. And I'm sitting here like measuring. I have it on speakerphone. So my husband, like, I'm so scared of making a mistake. So I'm like, everything's on speakerphone. You're going to double check the measurement on the syringe, because my biggest fear, I
Overdose.
think opioid crisis affect
Mm.
everybody, is making things
Mhm.
worse. And I am medically knowledgeable enough to know that an opioid overdose is not a good way to die. And I don't want my mom to have an inappropriate dose of morphine. And so I administered that amount sublingually very slowly to be sure she wouldn't choke while she is still doing this hard gasping for air. And literally nothing changed about her breathing status. She continued those hard, harsh breaths for the next 36, 38 minutes until they stopped and she died. And it was hell. Um I couldn't believe that my mom had died in this very intense, dramatic fashion, in a way that was like so different from how I'd seen my grandparents die. Where you might see like a little hiccup of breath and then they pass, but it was super distressing, with her eyes open and just that hard breath and the teeth smashing. Like nothing was even stopping that teeth smashing. And it's violent. It's such it's so much more intense than I ever could have
It is
imagined.
very, yeah, it can be, and
Yeah.
it can be. How are you now? How are you feeling now?
I still have serious
I was
PTSD
going to
from
ask.
that. Like, I can't remember my mom without that image popping into my
Mhm.
head and the sound of the breath. Like, sometimes I'll be asleep at night and I'll hear
It'll wake you up. Mhm.
it'll wake
Yep.
me up. And I just like wailed in pain watching her die like that, because I had imagined a much more quiet, peaceful death for my mom. And it was nothing like I'd been prepared for a hospice death, because I knew hospice deaths in general were not like that from everything I had been
Right.
told. And even so, there was no reason for us to think that there was anything unusual, because after she died, I let hospice know immediately, and they came about an hour later. They declared her, they bathed her, dressed her, changed her clothes, so there's no indication that this is being seen as a crime scene.
Quick question.
We had to wait. Yeah.
Why didn't the facility, or did you give the morphine to the facility so that they might administer that morphine, or what?
They offered it and they said, there's no way in hell we're touching that. That's why I had to ask hospice if I could give
Did
it,
they say why
because
they
they could,
wouldn't?
because it wasn't prescribed to them.
Okay. Now, the hospice that you called, did they say anything about morphine when giving to a patient? The hospice nurse is supposed to be the first one to give that first dose. Was that ever stated?
Didn't say
It was
anything.
never stated.
No,
Was the nurse?
I didn't know that
Yeah.
or hear that.
So
Yeah.
that's how that works. So the nurse that was there, was she actually an RN or an LPN? Do you know?
I'm actually not sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I had never that was never in any part of the training, and I just know that when man, that's really good to know, because when I called, and maybe she never told investigators that she had authorized the dose, and I'm guessing that's why.
So
And I don't know if she was feeling, a sense of urgency too, because she could hear that I was panicked, and everybody's human. And I think she could tell that she did tell investigators, like, I could tell this woman was watching her mom die and was very distressed. So she never mentioned to investigators that she had given me the dose or authorized it. She didn't say that she didn't, right? But that was sort of omitted from conversations we know later with law enforcement.
got you. So you had that call on speakerphone, but you weren't recording it.
I was not recording it.
Got
I
okay.
wasn't even thinking.
That's why I was like, okay, wait a minute. You just everyone heard this, but you weren't recording it. It was just on speakerphone. Okay.
Yeah, I was just on speakerphone so my husband could hear it, because I wanted him to be my second set of ears for these
Yeah.
instructions.
Okay.
Because again, you're not thinking like any sort of legal liability, because you have been prescribed these medications, you've been trained on using them, you've been told if you need to use them, call this hotline. And so that is the protocol as you understand
You
it.
did the right thing.
And
Mhm.
so we have the family come and say their goodbyes. And we called, we'd been in touch with the funeral home for a few days prior, right? To see, my mom wanted a cremation, see what the facility availability was like, if we needed to get people in from out of town.
Mhm.
So we'd already had contact with the funeral home, which later would be viewed as suspicious, interestingly. And the funeral home, they were going to take a while to pick up her body, but when they finally came, kind of late morning, we were already on the way back to my mom's place,
What
and
time?
we got a call from them. It was like 10:30 in the
Okay.
morning, and my mom had died. At like I think she died at 7 a.m.
When she
It was shortly after
when
sunrise.
she died, did the hospice send a nurse out to pronounce her?
Yeah, yeah. The nurse came out, pronounced her, dressed her, changed her, bathed
Was it
her,
the
the whole
same
thing.
nurse from before?
It was not. It was a different
Okay.
one. And we were on the way back, and the funeral home called us and said, there's been a problem. We can't pick up your mom's body. It's been taken to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation Crime Lab in Atlanta.
Per who?
Per the funeral home who tried to come and pick her up.
Who sent it there? Who sent the body there?
Well, we know that someone at the facility and or other persons had reported my mom's death as suspicious, even though they had called me down because she was dying.
Okay. Hold on. Can we stop for a second? Yeah. Your mom's body was sent to GBI,
Yeah.
right? And I'm just pure curious at this point. Who decided that was what they wanted to do? Who did that?
We later learned after discovery that it appears that the memory care facility had reported her death to law enforcement.
Why would
And
they do that? That's not common in that situation. Why would someone do that?
right. That happens. I mean, they're mandated reporters if they feel that there's been a suspicious death. So it seemed that someone there thought that my mom's death was suspicious, which was quite shocking to us, considering we had been called there because she was dying and it was an expected death.
What do they think was suspicious about it?
We didn't know.
Okay.
We, for the life of us, couldn't figure out what it was, because even after she had died and I had called to get the comfort kit advice, that same hospice who advised me on the comfort care use came out and dressed her and bathed her. So there was no indication that anything was criminal or unusual.
Okay. And then what happened next? So now she goes there. How long is she there? Are they doing, I guess, some private autopsy, if you will, right? They're doing
Yeah, the state did the autopsy, but what happened next, my mom was held for a couple of weeks before she could be returned to the funeral home for cremation. But what happened next was I immediately look for a lawyer, because I know, I didn't fall off the cabbage truck yesterday. I knew that the only way my mom's body was with the GBI was if there was a criminal investigation.
on
And
somebody.
so
You don't even know who at this point, though.
I assume it's me or my husband, because we were both in the room as she died. And so, and at this point, we just don't know, but we assume that it's us. But frankly, yeah, it could have been. I was wondering, like, is it someone at the facility potentially? That was also a thought that crossed my mind, because everything had seemed very off to us, like right down to not being able to get the appropriate care that we felt was appropriate. um, but law enforcement showed up at my mom's door. That attorney I consulted with, he said that he thought it was likely a murder investigation and that I was probably the suspect. He gave
Why did he think that? Why did he think that?
Because I was present with her death
At
and
the time.
I had administered the morphine. And he gave me some possible charges. He said, there's in Georgia, you have malice murder, you have felony murder. And I'm Googling these to kind of see, because I had not heard of felony murder at that point.
Mhm.
Um, and of course, terrified, right? Because I've never had any sort of adverse involvement with law enforcement in my life. I'm a woman who's in my 40s, and it's a long time to go with suddenly being under scrutiny in a way that you've never been.
Sure, sure.
And also I'm reeling from the shock and the grief of my mom's death. She just died hours prior in a really traumatic way. And so he tells me to prepare for law enforcement to make contact. And sure enough, when we get back to my mom's place, 5 sheriff's deputies' cars roll up in the yard, 2 plainclothes investigators asking to speak to me and wanting me to hand over my phone. I knew my rights. I said, you can talk to my attorney and you can get a search warrant. The
Okay.
investigator said, you know how this looks, don't you? And I said, it looks like I know my rights. Like,
I mean, yeah.
because that is the best practice. I'm also furious at this point too, because again, I had gotten into conflict with people and I'm angry. Like I am angry. I am in pain. I am scared. And it's like the worst situation to talk to anybody, even if they were protected. And I would rather my lawyer, who knows the whole story, be able to tell them.
Right.
And so they go and get the warrant. They speak to my attorney, and when they come back, the warrant is requesting my phone, the comfort kit, which actually relieved me, because I was like, oh, they're going to see she had a valid prescription. They're going to like go through everything and see it was like all on the up and up, and they're going to see her medical records. So that's going to be cleared up in
Sure.
my mind.
That's a
And
normal thought process. I would have thought the same thing, honestly. Yeah.
yep. You're like, okay, I don't even have to tell him anything. He told him what
Mhm.
happened. It's a misunderstanding. It's all good. Like, we rushed to get down here. It's like easy to find the record of plane tickets and calls. And my text messages, I even handed over my phone unlocked, because like all my text messages show like I'm reporting her agonal breathing to hospice. I'm reporting all this active dying, being like, well, what do I do? Like, can you
Mhm.
please get morphine to the facility? These are not the texts of someone who's plotting to kill their mom or overdose her or do anything inappropriate. I am in constant contact with hospice. And that search warrant, though, had my name and homicide on it. And at that point, I knew that I was a murder suspect.
But you weren't arrested at that time.
Absolutely not. I was not. And in fact, it was radio silent for 18 months, except uh, I was trying to kind of live my life and move through grieving. I could not resolve my mom's estate. You can't without cause of death and without any closure, right? And certainly not while you're suspect. You can't look into any kind of civil legal action while you're a murder suspect. Um, but I had a lot of questions about my mom's like circumstances leading up to her collapse. Like, was it a stroke? Did something happen at the facility? She had these large either Kennedy ulcers or bed sores. Were they Kennedy ulcers or were they bed sores? Like,
Sure.
um, my nurse friend had reported finding my mom lying in a pool of her own urine for hours, just several days before her collapse, which kind of flagged some concerns in my mind.
But she
Um,
was already on hospice.
she was already on hospice, but evidently staff at the facility had not come to check or change her for many hours.
Oh, got you.
Um,
Got
and so my friend was very concerned about that. And it was literally 2 days later that I got the call she was dying. So I was already planning to come down. Um, and so I had questions, and my search for answers, because the memory care facility refused to release any of my mom's records to me directly, even though I had a right to them as her power of attorney for 6 months after death. You have right to all their medical records.
you had that in writing?
I absolutely do have it in writing that I have the right to it. It's Georgia law,
But
because it was
you had it
durable
in
power of
writing, though.
attorney. Yeah, it was
You wasn't
medical and
married,
durable. But they
but you
didn't hand him over. And so I had to go to an attorney who sent a demand letter, and then they handed him over. No fight, right? Once the attorney sent that demand letter. And when they handed their records over, they also handed over the hospice records because they had duplicates of hospice's records. So, of note, hospice did not know I had their records because
wait,
those were
well,
given to me
the
by
fac the facility
facility.
had duplicates of the hospice records.
They sure do. So they had their own records plus hospice records, which were shared. And that was where I saw, and this was very foreboding, that the nurse, after my disagreement with her about my mom's need for morphine for comfort care, charted that instead she did not chart that I'd requested morphine. She charted that I requested euthanasia and put it in quotes. And that was when I was like, oh my God, is this why there was an investigation? Like
What day was this? That
the
note?
11th,
So that
July
is the day.
11th, the day before she died, when that it all come to a head where I was like, she's in agony when she's being turned, she's progressing. Can we get some comfort care prescribed to this facility?
You
Um,
I'm wondering too, right? And this is something that is actually going on right now with, America across the board. A lot of rural communities, this is, Harlem, Georgia, that's a rural community. Could they have even gotten medication out at that time,
oh
right? For
yeah,
us.
yeah. This was Evans, Georgia, so it's connected. So it's connected to a much larger, the second largest city in Georgia, which is Augusta. It's just a
Augusta.
suburb. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a suburb of Augusta. It's in a different county, but they have access to medications. In fact, that is the big medical center of this part of Georgia. You got like the Medical College of Georgia. You have multiple hospital systems there.
Mhm.
Um, so the reason given was she's comfortable, not we can't get it yet or we're trying.
I'm
Um,
one so
and and the
mm,
nurse had also very confusingly argued that I said, how long can my mom live without any fluids? And she was like, weeks. And I was like, is that medically possible to live weeks without any fluid intake?
it's possible, but, where I'm confused though is not that, it's one step before, right? Is you said that she was laying in her bed and she essentially soiled herself, right? But you also said that she wasn't really eating
Oh
much
no,
as
no.
far as you know.
She had soiled herself before she was found collapsed. It was 3 days prior to her collapse that
Okay.
she had been found by my nurse friend soiled, which and that was, and then she has these seeming ulcers show up. And so on July 6th, she was found soiled. And then it was July 9th that she collapsed. And so she had no food, no fluids, urination, defecation from the 9th through the 12th when she died.
But she was eating before that, eating and drinking?
She was drinking some Soylent. She was not eating much at that point.
Okay.
She was pretty emaciated. She'd mostly stopped eating. She might have a bite.
Okay.
Um,
And it
yeah.
so now they're at your door. I want to, because now you go back and they're at your door, right? We go to that. And for me, that's got to be, well, I don't want to say what it's got to be. Can you tell me what that feels like in terms of you're trying to get over your mother's passing? This is one of your best friends. You put your life on hold to take care of this, your mother, right? Which is a testament to who you are and how you were raised. How do you deal with that? Who did you lean on? What was that like?
Oh, it was an emergency, like, fight for your life feeling because even though I hadn't had adverse contact with law enforcement, like, they're out there, they're armed, and both my husbands are 2 men of color, they're 2 brown men, and so I'm afraid of, like, somebody getting shot. I'm afraid
Interesting.
of, like, my husband, he would keep peeking out the window while waiting for the warrant, and I was like, "If they mistake your finger for a gun, you could get killed." I'm so terrified of what might happen right now to us and our family. And they were also angry, right? Like, they were furious that I had evidently been accused, especially my husband, my other husband only arrived right after my mom died. He was caught in the same kind of flight delays. And so my husband, who was with me when my mom died, he's especially furious. And when investigators had come to the door, like, he kind of slammed the door after, they left. And I was like, you do not want to give them any reason to think that you're a threat
Right.
because they are dangerous, you know?
Yeah.
And I certainly, so even though I had never had adverse contact with law enforcement, wasn't a Pollyanna about what could happen. And so I was terrified. I was terrified that I was about to see someone else I love be killed. I was terrified that, like, a wrong move or anything would spark an alarm because you've got 5 sheriff's deputies out there and they're 2 to a car and they're all armed. That's very frightening. It feels like Waco. It's so scary. And um, so that's all you're thinking of is, like, just survive from one moment to the next. Like, grief is out the window. You are just a
Mhm.
machine at that point trying to get through.
You're incredibly self-aware too, right? That's one of the things where it's like, that's interesting to be that aware of your surroundings and your thought process still, and I'm not trying to paint a picture anymore, this is who you are. You're actively thinking about the
Oh, yeah.
men around you.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you're the one that's being investigated more or less, and you're still thinking about them.
Because you can do whatever to me. What matters to me is if someone I love is hurt.
You're a
And
special person.
it was um it was the same with my mom too. Like, I wasn't thinking of legal jeopardy. All I was thinking as my mom is gasping for air is, I can't let my mom die in agony. I want my mom to be able to die peacefully, and I feel an obligation as her power of attorney, as every commitment I made to her was to do everything within my power. It was my duty to my mom to ensure that, no matter what. And you don't think of legal liability. It's like, what can you live with? Like, could I have lived with myself if I'd been like, okay, you didn't get the prescription to the facility, but here I have this prescription and I didn't at least
Sure,
try to see if I was able to use
sure,
it?
sure,
Like,
yeah, sure,
I wouldn't have been able to live with that. I
yeah.
can live with being charged with murder, even if the state ultimately killed me. I could live with it
When
because,
you
yeah.
go ahead. That's a deep statement, right? It's you, because to me, and I say this in a way that um hopefully is taken the right way. You already knew your mother was on hospice. You knew she was actively passing. And in that moment, you're still saying, well, I still want to do this. And whatever the outcome is to me, I'll just deal with it.
Because how someone dies matters. Like, there are these 2 really critical points in someone's life, how they're born and how they
Yeah.
die.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I didn't want my mom's last experience on earth to be one of fear and pain and desperation for air.
Take me take me to the next 18 months, or take me through it, if you will, right? So now they've come to the house, and for a year and a half, no contact, no
My
anything.
family disappears during that time. I didn't know why. I had assumed that it was because, they were just kind of staying close to me for my mom's benefit. As painful as it was very weird to lose contact with them. They had texted a little bit in the days after her death, and then they just kind of, like, by early Christmas, no responses anymore. cards and gifts unresponded to, blocked on social media. So I lose
This
my
is your
family
family, your mother's sister, and these
and
people.
brother. Yep. And so they disappeared from my life, which was a whole other layer of grief, along with being unable to
Absolutely.
resolve my mom's estate.
Mhm.
Because also, like, being able to grieve with family, and especially when someone dies of Alzheimer's, they are the living memories of who my mom was and her
Yeah.
childhood. And
Yes,
those were the
yes,
people I most wanted to turn to remember
yes.
my mom. And I couldn't. And I was lucky I had both my husbands, but they still didn't know my mom really well from before. It's a different type of grief, right? Like, you can't,
Mhm.
you, so much of grieving is reliving memories of the person who died.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely,
And
absolutely.
and most of their memories of my mom were from after she got sick, because they were her caregivers too. They have very few memories of her from before she got sick. You know, they'd see her a couple of times a year, but didn't have a ton of contact. Um, but it's fits and starts, right? Like, on one hand, you sort of normalize in your life, you start to move through the grief, you accept that you're not going to get any answers anytime soon. But then every like 2 or 3 months or so, because you don't have a death report, and you keep reading stories of injustice in America, right? Like people who've been wrongly charged with crimes, or people who were on death row who were later exonerated. And you're like, why not me? I may not be a black man in this country, which would certainly make me much more vulnerable to that. But injustice can happen to anyone, and I could always be bycatch in a system that was never meant for me. And I was very acutely aware of that. I've been a peacemaker with the Red Hook Community Justice Center. I'd worked with formerly incarcerated men when my time with the Doe Fund. Um, I knew a lot about how the criminal legal system worked or didn't work in this country.
What do
And
you
because
mean,
I
though?
had, huh?
What do you mean by that? A system that was never meant for me. What does that mean?
Well, felony murder, for instance, we know that that was designed to catch up black and brown people and contribute to mass incarceration. So even if you don't kill someone directly, if you're associated in any way with the death of somebody during the commission of a felony, you can end up on death row or facing life in prison. And it's mostly in southern states. And yeah, I mean, it's you kind of, even just growing up in the South, and getting pulled over with a friend of mine who happened to be black when I was a teenager, and he was the one who was interrogated the most and called boy by the cops. Like, I
Yeah,
saw directly who was being targeted in the system, with everything from charge stacking to um, being caught in being unable to get out of jail. And even if you've never been convicted of a crime, because if you can't make bond, you can't have a good attorney, you can't make a good argument, then you end up in jail, and then the cycle keeps repeating. And then your condition of bond, if you do make it, is, well, don't be in a community where people are drinking alcohol or whatever, and then your neighbor has
yeah,
alcohol, you go back to jail. Like, it is definitely meant to catch people up who are poor and who are people from communities of color, because that is, the South ain't too far from the Civil War. This country's got a lot of problems.
it's
So,
interesting. That's interesting.
so I was very aware too, though, that even though I didn't fit that demographic, I was different. I was an outlier. I was
Mhm.
not I mean, I knew that a lot of people down south too weren't fans of people who moved to New York. And you know, there were people in the community, not saying any of the people who had implicated me in any way, but there were people in the community who had even called me a traitor before. Like, I
Does that
knew
anything
how I
do
was
with
viewed.
what
But,
about it with interracial dating, any of
oh,
that?
I'm sure that played a part too.
Sure.
This is why my husband's is a refugee.
Yeah.
So, and these communities are very, often very divided along race. And even when I was an investigator, you would see the, a lot of the fear and suspicion that plagued a lot of white communities. I had people pull guns on me for just knocking on their door, and those were always the white folks. So there was a lot of, like, there is a culture of fear and suspicion of outsiders, whether it's a racial ethnic outsider or a class outsider or a social outsider.
You said you were an investigator?
I used to be a federal investigator. I did background and special interview investigations for people with top secret and clearances for the government. So I made a lot of surprised, unannounced visits to people's houses for years down south, and I got a good overview of how people are when strangers show up or people they perceive as strangers.
And you know how much that changes the narrative of this entire story?
Mm.
That is so important.
Oh
That
yeah. Well,
that
I
is
also knew what was going on. You
yeah,
know?
that explained where it's like, well, as soon as you got the call, you knew where the body went, you said, "Oh, wait
Yeah,
a minute. This looks
and I
very
knew what it
familiar."
was.
Now I have an under okay, okay. So now I can ask you these other questions. So now you go back for me, you go forward, if you will, 18 months.
Yeah.
What happens?
Um, I am a day from my 42nd birthday, still without any answers beyond those medical records I'd gotten. Still with lawyers saying, if you were going to be charged, it would have happened by now. You'll probably just never get a death certificate, never hear anything because, you're on Reddit. I've also talked to medical examiners at this point, and they were like, we've never heard of anyone being charged with murder after someone was actively dying. We haven't even heard of anyone being charged with murder from sublingual morphine. They're like, it's been drips or injectable. And they were
Mm,
like, we don't really think this is going to be a risk for you, especially if there's records showing she was actively dying. It's probably
mhm.
just slow, caught in the system. And so at this point, the fear has largely subsided. And it's just like you've resigned yourself to like, I may never have answers. I may never access, be able to resolve her estate or, look into life insurance or anything like that. And you just kind of accept it.
'Cause you don't have a death certificate.
Don't have a death certificate, don't have any resolution. And,
Okay.
my lawyers have said, oh, you can be a suspect for life, you know? Um,
True.
and so I'm about to throw this party to celebrate my 42nd birthday. And um, I made a post about the last gift that my mom had ever given me on Instagram, which was teaching me how to paint in oil.
Um,
And an anonymous commenter says, shame on you. Why have you been indicted for the murder of your mom? This is why your family disowned you. And then she or he copied and pasted the indictment number,
mhm.
the judge, and then 2 counts of murder, felony murder, and malice murder in the state of Georgia. And having seen court documents before as an investigator, it looked real.
You knew.
And I knew in my gut that it was real.
Mhm.
And yet I didn't understand like who and how did someone get this information and put it on my Instagram. My husbands are like kind of freaking out, but they were like, well, maybe it's a scam. Maybe it's someone trying to blackmail you. It could be an elaborate identity theft scheme. But I had other feelings. So I screenshot it and I sent it to my attorney and I said, is this real? Am I about to be arrested? And he just texted back within about 5 minutes. Yes.
Why didn't he tell you when
He
he
didn't
first
know
found
until
out?
then. He had to go and look on the database. No
Okay.
one gets a courtesy call when a warrant goes out for your arrest because you might run, right? So they want
I
to
would
surprise you.
assume. But why I guess for me, how did the person who posted that know
We
before
will
any
never know.
that's
It
interesting.
was not publicly available. I don't know if it was a grand juror, if it was somebody who was involved and who wanted to rub it in my face.
Mhm,
But they obviously knew who I was, knew
mhm.
about the issues with my family, and created a burner account because I had like 0 followers. It was like 1 day old to make this post out of malice. But it turned out they just kind of saved my life because, I could have been picked up by NYPD and taken to Rikers at any point, and not able to mount a defense or make bond.
So what
But
did you do?
because of that, my attorney, he jumped into action and he was like, Rachel, if this happened to me, the only person in the country I would have to defend me is Brian Steele. And
That name is very familiar.
I was like, the young thug attorney? I said, there's no way he's going to take my case because he's super famous. I'm not a millionaire. Uh, why would you even suggest him? Like, it's not going to happen. And he goes, oh no, he will. I have him on the phone.
Oh, wow.
he'd evidently been talking about this case with people too, because this, you know, attorneys who heard about it were in shock because they'd never heard of anything like it before.
Mhm.
And he had gotten in touch with Brian and his wife, and sure enough, within about an hour, I was on the phone with Brian, and he was like, "Listen, this is what we're going to do. We're going to arrange for you to turn yourself in. We're going to make sure you make bond. And if we have to go to trial, we will go to trial, but we are going to do everything that we can to demonstrate, you know, your innocence and ensure that you get through this." And at that point, it was like the gates of heaven have opened up. And, you know, because
Yeah.
you've gone from feeling like, I mean, because both those charges are subject to the death penalty or life in prison.
Mhm.
And and thus, you've already read the stats of, weirdly enough, women who are perceived as having harmed family members actually face harsher penalties from juries because it's seen as like a betrayal of the natural order.
I
So it's one of the few places in which women face harsher sentencing.
That's interesting. So now you talk to him, right? You have some understanding of who he is and what he does.
Oh yeah,
Um,
I'd
did
already
he
heard
f
about him. Yeah.
Yeah, did he feel a special connection to your case? What makes a guy like that take a case like this?
You know, that's a great question, and he's been asked that by reporters, but um, he said that it felt cruel to not, because he was just so appalled.
Mm,
Um, he said it was very clear I loved my mom and hadn't engaged in any wrongdoing, and he felt compelled. I mean, I think people have an interesting perspective on defense attorneys. There's this idea of like, oh, what kind of person you have to be to defend all these scumbags. And it's like everybody has a constitutional right to a robust defense in court of law.
sure. Yeah.
And if we don't have that, then injustice runs way more rampant already than it does, because injustice is a fact of life. There's you know, no such thing as a perfect criminal legal system anywhere, and certainly in America we got a lot of issues. And so um, I don't have that same perspective of attorneys, defense attorneys, even who they may defend might be reprehensible to me. It's still important for every single person, because if no one gets that robust defense, then, you know, if you pick and choose, then no one is protected. Rather, everyone
So
has to be entitled. And so I was very excited to have someone who was so competent and so ferocious
yeah.
in my corner, because I knew how deeply he would be committed to the fight if it came to it.
I love that, and I'm one of those people that believes that there are good people in the world. It's just a little bit of both, right? You're gonna get some good and some bad and some balance. But my next thought though, right, as I'm wondering for you, so you go to Georgia, you turn yourself in,
Yeah.
and how much did it cost to get out? Like, I just at this point, I'm just really curious.
So the bond was $200,000. Now
And you
you
had to
have
have all of it or 10%?
you have to pay 15.
Or
And
10%.
but with legal fees and everything else, oh man, it thrust me nearly $500,000 in debt, which I still cannot find work, because that's what happens when you're charged with a felony in this country.
So, how do you even finance that?
Our entire life savings, both of us, our life savings and retirement, every single dime we had, plus some borrowed,
Yeah.
every single thing, our entire life savings.
How are you feeling now?
It's weird because um, the way I described it was, you know, after the charges were dismissed in August, which was 6 months after my arrest, I was only incarcerated for 12 hours, um, and out on bond for 6 months. And, you know, I lost my brand new job that I loved, that I had as soon as I was arrested.
Yeah.
Um, Lost my family. I lost my reputation immediately. Like, headlines everywhere were branding me a murderer. And there was this narrative that I hated my mom and wanted to get rid of her. So it felt like being gaslit by the whole planet. Um, I I had my identity stolen, and money was siphoned away from that. It turns out that a lot of people, when they are incarcerated, one of the first things that happens is all your information gets sold to the dark web because you're not in a position usually to protect your identity because you're in
Yeah.
jail.
Yeah.
So that happened. I lost like everything, except for the people, my spouses and my friends and my home. Thank God, a lot of people end up homeless. But how I feel now is, it's like, imagine if you had this huge tumor on the side of your neck, and like that's the accusation, right? And it's, you can kind of hide it with your hair sometimes, and maybe
Yeah.
people won't notice, and it's there, and like
Yeah.
it's not likely to be fatal, but it's still a problem. And then you
Yeah.
get charged one day, and it's like the tumor suddenly explodes and it's
Yeah.
oozing pus, and your doctor's like, this could kill you.
Yeah.
You need to spend a ton of money and get all the evidence and focus every part of your life. You're going to lose everything, but it might just save your life. And but we're going to do everything we can to ensure this huge grotesque tumor that can't be hidden anywhere is doesn't kill you. So you send all your evidence in, right? You do all this legwork where we sent the evidence to the medical examiner, which we had on our end, which will include
Right.
those medical records as far as we know we didn't have access to, that context that's so important, proof of the prescription, videos of my mom as she was dying, proof of like us getting down there, all of my text messages, like
Mm.
stuff that even the cops hadn't pulled from my phone. And that was when the medical examiner re-reviewed her autopsy, and he changed her cause of death. It was no longer ruled a homicide. And so
Oh,
the context matters a lot for medical examiners
it
because
does.
it affects morphine concentrations, right? We don't know for a fact that this is the case, but what we do know is that context of how she died affects how morphine redistributes in blood. So if we're eating, drinking, talking, urinating, defecating, morphine's going to look different in terms of the post-mortem concentration
Mhm.
than if you're not excreting anything and your kidney and liver isn't working and you're actively dying with low oxygen saturation. He didn't know any of that stuff as far as we're aware until I sent him the records where the nurse was documenting her lack of excretion, the oxygen saturation, the breakdown of the bilirubin, the hemoglobin in her blood, making her skin yellow, so liver failure.
Mhm.
And he had noted total liver necrosis and kidney failure on autopsy report. And the morphine concentrations weren't especially high anyway, but put in that context with what we said we had given, I administered as a dose, the dose made sense now in the context of the condition of her body, as far as we're aware from our conversations with other medical examiners who reviewed all of the records.
Correct.
They were like,
Correct.
oh, this postmortem distribution looks like a normal dose, does not look like an overdose, knowing what, we know. So we can only assume that the medical examiner would have, been like, oh, okay, this looks a little different from what we originally thought. And he revised that cause to death, the undetermined. And then at that point, it's very hard to bring murder charges if you don't have a clear murder. And the district attorney had already begun telegraphing doubts about the case during my bond hearing, which was interesting. She had done some digging of her own. I think
Mm.
one of the things that she learned after I was arrested even was she got records from the memory care facility, and they had shown that we hadn't signed in the days leading up to my mom's death. And she or someone in her office had asked just the front desk staff at the facility, oh, why isn't she signed in for these days if she was here? And the
Mhm.
staff member said, oh, we don't make family members sign in when someone's dying. And so at the bond hearing, she announces she's not going to fight bond. And she also said, well, I don't think this was out of malice. It seems her mom, because it also seemed that people didn't mention to investigators that my mom had end-stage cancer either. There was a lot of information, it appeared, that the GBI and investigators did not have until we
Becau
provided.
So this to me is a breakdown on a couple points, right? Not even just for the hospice or whatever. This
Oh
is,
yeah.
you got a medical records problem, which is
Yep.
huge, right? There's no continuum of the medical record. So you should have access to that record. You should have been able to send it directly to whoever needed it at that time So that to me would have stopped all of this immediately.
That would have been the hope, yeah. We
Yeah.
assumed that they would have gotten the medical records, though, as soon as there was an investigation, because that's what you assume.
Right, right. No, I understand that. I understand
Yeah.
that. And so how long did the case go on?
It was only 6 months after my arrest because it was the length of time of us getting all those records together, getting independent review by other medical examiners and forensics experts, and then sending them independently to the medical examiner and to the DA so they could evaluate. We did a very rare thing. Like, normally you save your evidence for trial, you don't show your hand. But because I had so much exculpatory evidence,
Sure.
and my attorney believed very much in the ethics of both the district attorney and the medical examiner. He was like, I think that if they review these with fresh eyes, there's a possibility they will reconsider whether or not these charges were appropriate. And there's no pushing or prodding. It's really just like, here's all our evidence. Can you look at the case again?
That takes a lot of faith from that attorney as well.
It
He
does.
really he, and you mentioned even without I would look at, right? Because you're right. Why would I put all my hands out there immediately? But he's like, wait a minute, this doesn't even make any sense. And to me, I still would ask him because something here is saying he felt something. He really this is a very experienced attorney, right? This is one of the best ever, probably, right? We can make that
Yeah.
statement. And for him to say, like, no, 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 we don't this doesn't even need to go that far. We just need to figure this out. How did you feel about that? Were you like, well, this is normal. Maybe we should hold it. What was your thought process?
My thought process was, there is so much exculpatory evidence that surely there can't be that many corrupt people. Surely somebody will be like, what the hell happened here?
Sure.
I still had to have faith in the goodness of people as much as I have a lot of my concerns about the criminal legal system. I had to believe that somewhere between the DA, who didn't even actually bring the charges against me, she was an interim DA. It was the lead investigator who presented my case to the grand jury. So she came on after. I'm not
Mhm.
sure, she would have brought them in the first place, because she was the type to do a lot of digging. And it appeared that she did even more digging than the investigators did.
I
And
believe
she
it. I believe it.
and when she dug and found, like, she even pulled my mom's financial records and saw that, I wasn't getting money from my mom. I was funding her care. And
You were paying for it.
starts
Like
to
you were
break
literally paying
right.
for everything. Right, right.
So it starts to kind of break down this narrative that seemed to have emerged of, like, me wanting my mom to die and get rid of her, and then her hearing, like, the whole reason I was in town was because my mom was dying, which was
Mm.
not knowledge. That was Investigators didn't know that.
Was there anything else kept out of the case that probably would have kept this from even going this far?
Oh my god, yes, the morphine prescription. As far as we're aware, that morphine prescription was never disclosed. We don't know what happened to it. It was taken into custody and law enforcement, but never showed up in discovery. And we don't see, there's sort of inconsistent mention of it by the medical examiner. And we don't know if he's just mentioning morphine as, like, a thing that he would expect to find, or if he's mentioning it in the context of, like, oh, I knew there was a prescription. But as far as we're aware, it was not disclosed, certainly, like, to media, that there was a morphine prescription to my mom, because we kept seeing, like, these news articles saying that it was left behind by hospice workers or taken, which was just really weird. Like, left behind in the facility, like, left out, and I picked it off
Yeah.
a counter, you know? And it was like, no, this was something that had been prescribed. We were instructed. So we knew there were huge gaps, but I had a ton of evidence, like, on my phone from text conversations. I'd taken photos of the prescription before handing it over. I had eyewitness. Also, there was no mention of my husband being in the room or being a direct witness or any part. So it seemed like no one had ever spoken to him. And we had eyewitness affidavits also from nurses, like
Mhm.
my friend Allison, who had come in and examined my mom before she died. We just had a huge amount of evidence because I had been so concerned about the care, and again, collecting my own evidence, having no idea that this would be what would be needed to save my life.
I I also wanna just go one step further with this because I wanna make sure that people do understand or at least help me understand. The nurse the one that pronounced. So when someone passes and they're on hospice, the
Mhm.
coroner doesn't come out. We send out a hospice nurse. Now, in some states, might be a chaplain. It's different for every state. But in Georgia, we have to send out an RN.
Yep.
What what made the for me, right? And you just tell me if I'm wrong. Somewhere along the lines, this RN had to say something to the facility that triggered some of this as
We
well.
don't I don't get the impression that it was the RN who came and declared my mom. It seems there might have been a series of phone calls after my mom died, that happened after that nurse came out, and we don't know who made what to whom, but there was just a lot of chatter, and I'm still working with my legal team to fully figure out what kind of chatter was going on. And there was even chatter going on between people as my mom was dying, rather than like even the doctor being reached out to, as far as we know, which seems to have, there have been some things that were outside of protocol, uh, on their end, it seems.
Mhm.
And we're still trying to get the answers to that, because what happened to my mom, we know for a fact should not have happened. What happened to me and my mom should not have happened. And we also know that, you know, there were misrepresentations made at some point to law enforcement about the nature of my mom's death and my involvement. And there was, an impression given that I wanted my mom to die, and that I just wanted, to get rid of her, rather than what I was in fact saying was like, I don't want my mom to suffer horribly. I don't want my mom to be in agony, which are normal things to say as your parent is dying.
I think they're beyond not even just normal things, right? The other
Yeah.
part for me is that you get the call and you hop and figure out how to get there right away. Like, there'd be no reason to do that
Yeah, like, why am
if
I
you
I'm rushing down to kill my mom,
yeah, that
like,
doesn't even make sense. Like, there'd
it
be no
doesn't make
reason to
sense.
do that. So, and one thing I wanna do, because I want to respect your mother, I wanna start referring to her as Marsha, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. And Marsha for me is a this is probably one of the best mothers anyone could have met, and I
Yeah.
can tell that simply by how she raised you. I can feel it through this conversation. I can hear it in your voice. I can tell the sincerity that you have towards this situation. When you figure out finally court case is over, what did you do next? What was the first thing that you did?
Oh my god, if this happened to me, this will happen to someone else, and they won't make it out alive or with their
Mm.
freedom.
And this goes back to which is what I've been saying from minute number 10 of this conversation. You are so focused on the betterment of everyone else. That is like who you are at your core. Like, how does this even happen? These bad things happen to great people is really starting to frustrate me. And I'm just like, what are we doing here? Right? Did they even talk to you and really understand who you were as a person? Did anyone do that?
No.
No.
Um, but hopefully they'll get to know who I am now. Um, my it's again, it boils down to what can you live with. Um, I cannot have my mom suffer the way she did and me suffer as I did and have it mean amount to nothing. All be for nothing. Like that suffering has to mean something. And I haven't been able to find work, so what better way to occupy my time than to find a way to make that suffering mean something by trying to prevent this from happening to another family. I know that my specific situation is extraordinary. However, people get into conflicts with family members as their loved ones are dying all the time. And
Mhm.
my case demonstrate how thin that barrier is between an accusation and then being criminalized for it. If maybe a documentation isn't followed through or there's a dispute, because the thing about hospice is someone's always going to die. And especially in a country that has gotten through the opioid crisis, where there's
Mhm.
still a lot of fear and misunderstanding even around opioids, with law enforcement, with family members, and all the misconceptions people have about the use of morphine in hospice, like, oh, they give it to them to kill them. Like,
Yeah.
Oh my God, they're going to die anyway.
Yeah.
It is so easy. All that I could think of was like, what if somebody who doesn't have the life savings I have, who doesn't have the know-how of the criminal legal system or the understanding of like, oh, I should be documenting this because something seems off. What happens if their family member goes, oh, they overdosed the loved one with morphine and then that's why they died? And they report that to law enforcement.
Hmm.
And what if law enforcement believes them?
Right.
And what if a hospice company or a care facility goes, you know what, I'm going to CYA, I'm not going to hand over any records because there's no requirement to. These people are on their own. Because in my case, hospice did not hand over, as far as we're aware. There was a request sent for my mom's medical records, but they appear to never gotten the records of the last days of my mom's life, which again are critical context. And I realized then that if someone else alleged inappropriate or unauthorized morphine use for someone who died in hospice, and it may have already happened, but people who are facing the death penalty potentially are far more likely to take plea deals. People who are arrested on murder charges ain't going to have $30,000 usually laying around to pay for that $200,000 plus bond.
And you
Um,
never got that money back, right? I'm
oh
assuming
no, you don't get that money
you
back.
don't get that back. You have
There
to
are
pay
no
the whole thing to get it
refunds.
back. Yeah.
There's no refunds. There's no apologies. So this could have happened to somebody else, but they might be from a community or a family or a life where they didn't have the privilege to speak out because they may still be in jail.
I again, and it's like even as you continue to talk, you're still constantly like uplifting the next people. Like this could happen to somebody else. And it's like, this really is fascinating to me. For me, and one of the things that I look at that we haven't talked about um, was Marsha's Law,
Yeah.
right? Explain to us what that is and what are you looking to do with that?
So when I was charged, one of the
Hmm.
first things we did was start digging to see, was there a specific law that would have protected the administration and possession of morphine contained within that comfort kit for family caregivers who have patients on hospice in Georgia.
Hmm.
And one of the most striking things we found is there isn't. There are protections for medical staff, for nurses and doctors who are expected to administer end of life medications. But there is no requirement, for hospice companies to have a chain of command on like, hey, we've prescribed a comfort kit to the family. This was the person who trained them. This is the training that they had. This is when it's authorized to be in the possession of the family, and where this is when it was removed, right?
Sure.
So we want police doses, but like have a chain of command for like who's handling controlled substances, because that's really sensitive. That in the event of an investigation or what have you would be required to be handed over to law enforcement or coroners, right? So
Mhm.
law enforcement would understand like this was an expected thing for the family to have, because we realized one of the foundational charges for me was felony murder, which was predicated on the assumption of felony possession of an opioid,
Mhm.
right? And so there was this assumption that was made that me being in, having a comfort kit was illegal in the first place because there was no specific legal protection for me as a family caregiver to be in possession of it or to administer it to a patient, right? Because people are protected by law to self administer medications, even in memory care facilities. But if someone's actively dying and obtunded, they can't administer their own medications. So that falls to
Sure.
the family. And I realized then that, wow, this is a huge gray area that no one's really looked to close, because you needed a precedent setting case such as mine to expose this as a potential problem, especially again in light of the opioid crisis, where there is a heightened awareness and wariness of the use of opioid medications, especially in the home.
With
Um,
mm,
and so Marsha's Law is very simple and straightforward. It really just mandates, and it probably would have prevented most, if not all, of what happened to me,
yeah,
right?
I can see
Because
that.
um, it started with this idea that I had done something shady and illegal. Like if she's someone who'd steal morphine or use unauthorized morphine, then she's someone who'd kill somebody.
Yeah.
Rather than she's acting as a normal caregiver, she was told and instructed to use it in the circumstances of an actively dying person. This is the protocol for it, where it's clearly outlined for families too. So Marsha's law would require that when families have loved ones that go into hospice and or the caregivers of their choosing, that they basically just get like a contact sheet that they can keep with the comfort kit, and that the hospice company keeps a copy of too, that says this is the nurse who's trained them on the use. These are the outline protocol for like who to call, when to call, and the family was prescribed it on this date, to be used by family and caregivers, and just kept with the comfort kit. And in the event of an investigation after that person dies, the law would require that the hospice company turn over those medical records, as well as this documentation that, yeah, the family was given this comfort kit and they were told these are the instructions for use.
Yeah.
And, there's a chain of command, not how did this person get morphine and why
Right.
on earth
Right.
would they use it? It automatically answers a lot of questions around, whoa, there's this opioid that someone gave to somebody and
Oh,
they were
wait.
a layperson.
There's another gap though, because your mother was on a different hospice before she went into the facility.
But having that paper would have shown the chain of command, it either
Yeah.
changing hands, and it would have exposed that maybe they didn't do something that they were supposed to do, such as disposing of it. Because
Dispose of it.
paper would also say this is when it's taken away or the stop order.
Yeah. I I'm wondering too, right, when I look at this story in its totality, and for me, you weren't found guilty on anything,
No.
right? Everything was thrown out, and you're saying you're still having trouble finding a job.
Yes.
What is that?
It's two things. First of all, the state of Georgia does not seal records, they only restrict them, which means that if you have advanced enough background search software, which most companies have now, it will show that I have been charged with 2 counts of murder. They just can't click and look into more information on them.
Well, they can look and see that you were
But they can
not
see the
found
charges.
guilty.
They'll see that it was dismissed.
Yeah.
But those charges, there is such a stigma in this country. There is this belief that many people have, especially if they've never had adverse contact with the criminal legal system, is that, well, you had to do something shady to get in trouble like that. You had to do something untoward.
Yeah.
Um, and also, if headlines have gone ahead and branded you a murderer and your face is splashed everywhere, you are, especially if you're working on white collar profession like I did. And I was working as a life sciences and medical copywriter. So I was working with medical clients accused of a medical crime. I am now a legal liability, because who wants to, like, you can hire a million people who haven't been charged with murder involving a pharmaceutical. Why me? And even outside of my field, which I loved, my other husband, he's an Alzheimer's researcher at NYU. Like, this is our passion, right? Is sort of being
Mm.
at the forefront of medicine. Um, and again, I still have this gene, right? So I loved working with, early stage companies, developing genetic medicines for Alzheimer's and cancer. And that was really my passion. Working to help get them funding. So I was working a lot with them at the investor stage. I'm a hot potato to those people. And now, after you become infamous, it's very, very hard to find work. And if you do, you kind of have to leverage like what happened to you as part of the experience. And at that point, in some ways, you risk sort of just being a novelty hire, or, like, oh, we'll have you do a speaking engagement. But there's still so much social stigma. It is extremely hard to find work. And you're always going to have to address it up front too, which might get you thrown out of the pile just right up front, because you don't want anyone to be surprised, as they start digging, like, whoa, this person was charged. You have to talk about it up front. And in the job applications that I put in, and I was someone who got 2 job offers the January before I was charged, before I took the one. I was very competitive in the market.
Mhm.
And now, dozens and dozens and dozens of applications later, not a peep. Um,
I I wonder though, and this is just for me because I know people are gonna ask. Is the issue getting the type of job that you're used to having or just no job at all?
Um, could I get a job in retail? Sure.
Okay.
Um, but a white collar job that would give me the flexibility I need to push for Marsha's Law, to be able
Mhm.
to travel, to be able to speak, um, that is the challenge. And, you know, it's a weird position to be in because if you take like the retail job, I mean, your earning has plummeted anyway. Like forget your retirement. I was making a six-figure salary.
Yeah.
Um and I have enormous debts that would take a very long time to pay off, if ever, actually. And now that student loan laws have changed, like I am scrambling. But I also am involved in civil proceedings, which will require travel, as well as getting Marsha's Law. So retail's kind of out of the question because you don't have that flexibility. And I still have to resolve my mom's estate. So even with like the best retail job, you're not going to be able to travel and do those things. And I am in a position now where I am cruising by on like my husband's able to support, basic food in the apartment. But for traveling to get the law passed and to try and rebuild my life, I'm basically just depending on donations and like cat sitting gigs here and there. So it's not no job at all, although that is often the case with some people. It's the inability to have a job that enables me to do this work that I am so committed to doing in my mom's name. And it's one of those things where I'm willing to go without for as long as is feasible to try and make that happen. Now, if you were to ask me this like 3 years from now, I weren't able to find work, but I'd gotten Marsha's Law passed, would I be working in retail? Yeah, yeah.
It's a
It's not
yeah.
it's not beneath me, it's
Yeah,
not.
no,
I'm
I
not
get it, I get
it
it.
that way. But like again, like how can I sleep at night? Going without, but still able to like push forward on this law and resolve my mom's estate. You know, yeah, I can go without, but it's so hard to have had your dream career and to have been doing this work that was so meaningful and then just suddenly like nothing because of that reputation shattering. And not to mention my family never came back around, not even after the charges were dismissed.
So that's even more interesting. Now, these are people that, to be fair, you did say they never really understood you, right? Growing
They
up, they
didn't,
never.
but I thought they loved me.
Yeah,
They certainly told me they did.
yeah.
It was one of those things. It's like, yeah, you're kind of weird, you're the black sheep, but they were so close to my mom. Like I spent every Christmas, like all the holidays with them. Like we sent each other cards and talked regularly. I saw them every time I was with my mom. And even though I know they didn't approve of who I was, I never imagined that I would just be dead to them.
What if there's one thing you could tell them right now if they were listening, what would that be?
Like, I don't have any grudges. I just want to I just want to be able to know you again before y'all die because the idea of my aunt and uncle and the people I've loved and known all my life dying without me ever seeing them again is devastating and I still care.
Have Have you thought about just showing up to the town?
I'm actually a little scared of that. Um I'm afraid that my aunt might involve law enforcement and I know that law enforcement in that town is not a fan of me.
What does
So,
that mean? What does that mean?
I mean, I you know, I think that uh well, I would assume they're not a fan of me because um I have been talking about a lot of the problems that happened, and I think that um anything that casts scrutiny on a community is very uncomfortable for people. But I think that um I wasn't the friendliest. Like when they came to the jail to see if I wanted to talk ahead of my bond hearing, the the officer said, the investigators are here. Do you want to talk? And I said, tell them I said, fuck no. So,
Okay, that's
I'm a
another
very
part of the story.
spicy sort of person, you know,
Well, we didn't
like
know that beforehand, right? So I
I,
didn't have that information.
oh my God, no, listen, I am animated by a lot of fire and fury. I'm somebody who is very strongly morally and ethically compelled, but I'm not a pushover, right?
Right.
Like there was a very, very vague notion of a plea deal floated very early on. And I was like, no, I'd rather face the death penalty. Like I am a very, like, you know, kill me trying. I have really, it's like what you can live with again. And I was never going to live with admitting guilt for a thing I didn't do, a crime I didn't commit. And I was never going to live with putting myself in a position where I could not speak out against injustice or speak up for people who are vulnerable to it. Um, and like when I say probably not fans, like I talk critically of the criminal legal system. And that is, something that is never really going to change about me. I have to be really thoughtful in what I say, but I speak very generally and, but strongly about the current state of this country in terms of how we approach law. And I think it's a real problem that people are held in jail without bond, without access to their attorneys. I think it's a real problem that there hasn't been jail reform really, but prison reform. And like I think what the conditions I saw in that jail were a real problem. I think that the targeting of certain communities is a real problem, right?
Mhm.
And I don't keep my mouth shut about that because I can't live guided by fear. If I'm going to make any kind of meaningful change, I have to leverage every ounce of privilege that I do have. And one of those is being a communicator. And one of those is, being a professional communicator all my life and having had these charges dismissed. If I am too chicken shit to speak out against the things that are wrong, then I'm never going to make any sort of meaningful headway or impact. So I can't, shy away from saying, yeah, there's some really real problems that contributed to what happened to me, not just with how we approach death care and end of life care in America, but also with how we approach, um, you know, the entire criminal legal system anyway, and how it operates. It exposes some really, what happened to me exposes some really intense problems that need to be looked at and examined more closely. And I hope to spend the rest of my life finding ways to examine them and working with great lawyers and advocates to help make this country a better place for everybody, because I am not so cynical that I don't believe in the promise of a better future or a better state. Even though I moved from Georgia, I still would like to see things improve there too, beyond hospice. And so um, I hope to have a lot to say for a long time about ways we can make things a bit better for people, especially who are incredibly vulnerable to prosecution or
Mm.
criminalization just by going through life or caring for loved ones at the end of life.
I truly admire this passion and your willingness to do more for others. One of the things that I have seen for my entire life, because I do have people who have been charged with things, and to your point, even if they're acquitted, it is difficult for them to get back into the realm of their everyday norm or like society. What are some things that you think we could be doing as a country to kind of fix that problem too? Because for me, even outside of everything, I am I'm appalled that it's like she did her due process, right? They said that everything was not there, if you will, and from there, it's like, why can't you go back to your regular life? Like, how do we fix that in your opinion?
Man, you have to overhaul basically the way the entire system operates. I think that one of the first things that needs to happen is we got a real problem with pre conviction incarceration in this country.
Mm,
70% of people who are incarcerated have not been found guilty of the crime alleged crime for which they've been incarcerated. They are in jails. They are not in prisons. And when you go to jail, you lose your job.
Yeah.
Most everybody loses their job.
Yeah.
And then to get out, you lose whatever savings you have to get back on your feet. And it is
Sure.
so easy. Even just 12 hours in that jail, man, I understood how people end up getting more charges stacked on just by being there, because it is a place that nurtures violence and nurtures pain in other people. There is no beauty, there is no creature comforts. Um, you can't so much as hug someone with getting threatened with being put in Deepak or solitary. Like, you are under constant, intense scrutiny just for the most basic of human emotions or feelings or reactions, and everyone is on edge. And so, if you don't do something that ends up getting you put in solitary or having a charge stacked on for jail, then if you manage to get out, I mean, I met people there who've been waiting trial for 4 years because they couldn't make,
Mhm.
their lives are shattered. They have loved ones who die, who are on the outside, and many of them were caregivers. People go in and they lose access to their medications. I met a woman who had a stroke because she'd been taking off all her medications as soon as she went to jail, and the jail physician couldn't see her for more than 2 weeks and didn't prescribe her all her medications again. And that happens every day in countries, all in jails all around the country. There were people there who didn't even know what state they were in. They had been moved around so much.
Mhm.
And these people don't have access to their laptops or their social connections to build a case for their innocence. They don't have access to paid attorneys in the way I did. They're waiting for, and like, God bless the public defenders out there, but their caseloads are astronomical. It may take years to be assigned a public defender, and then you hope that they can build a case with very limited resources when you're stuck in a jail cell. So I think the problem in so many ways actually begins in jails, and making that barrier to exiting jail or avoiding jail so astronomically high for even the smallest charges. And then you start to have this compounding problem of recidivism. And recidivism, like, we have such a misunderstanding of it in this country. It's not like you got back out and you stole something. Sometimes recidivism is as simple as the woman I met who ended up back in jail because she went back and found out her boyfriend was still dealing drugs, but it was the only place she had to live. And so she went back to jail because he had drugs on him,
Mhm.
even though she wasn't in possession. Because one of the conditions when you're out on bond, not only do you give up your Fourth Amendment rights to no unreasonable search or seizure, but you can't have alcohol, you can't have drugs, you can't be, we had to throw away like all the alcohol in our house for any party in case the cops showed up at any time, because that could have sent me back to jail.
Yeah.
You don't check in on time with your bail bondsman. You got bad internet connection, or I didn't have a monitor on me. I had to check in online and like geotagged. Any number of those things can send you back to jail. And that is often where so many people just fall off a cliff. And then any employer looks at the history and they're like, well, you weren't able to show up for this, or you lost this job and had a huge gap, even though you haven't been convicted of something. You look like this unreliable, messy person, even sometimes despite your best efforts, simply because you got caught in the incarceration machine known as the American jail system.
Right. Right. I I first off, it's refreshing to see someone care so much about others and they put everything about others, even ahead of themselves, right? Even to hear what you're going through right now, even in the job market, and still being able to say, yeah, Henry, I could take that job, but I wouldn't be able to fight for other people. That is probably one of the most selfless things I've ever heard in my life, and I commend you for that. The other thing is I also want to tell you, as someone who's interviewed a lot of people and also someone who's in hospice, your story will change the way that we do hospice as a whole. But more importantly, it's going to provide a lot of exposure for people who don't even really understand how this is supposed to work. You are by far And I was just saying this earlier today, right? Two things I said when you talked about it. One, I see a lot of stories about her going to jail. I don't see much about her getting out. That is literally a conversation I had about an hour before we talked. I said, I see a lot of articles about this, but I don't see a lot of articles. I don't see a lot of people supporting her after she got out. And I think that's something that we as a whole need to start taking some strong looks at as well, right? It's cool to say someone did something, but when they get acquitted, why isn't it cool to come back and say, this is a very good person and none of this was actually true? You kind of check a lot of the boxes for me, and I want to continue to follow you in everything you do going forward. And I also want to know how I can help you. And then for us, right here, whatever. What is there anything I didn't ask you that you would love people to know? Anything that's been on your mind? Any one, two, three? It doesn't matter to me. Take all the time you need. That's something that people need to know, whether about you, your story, just in general, any nugget, just we wanna hear that.
Man, this is a hard one to say because I'm not good at I hate the sense of being pitied ever, right? So it's so hard to talk about um the challenges because I am
Mhm,
someone who operates on hope and I'm very animated by it. I think a misconception that I've seen and that I think is important to clear up is a lot of people, especially people from backgrounds of privilege, they believe that if the charges are dismissed and you were somehow wronged, that you get compensated for that in some way, that somehow
mm,
everything gets like put right and you get restored. They don't realize that you're now on your own. It's that tumor analogy again. So when
yes.
those charges are dismissed, the only thing you learn is the tumor won't kill you, but you still have a huge
Mm,
tumor that's
yeah,
like leaking trauma and pain and you know it's still scarring you and just seeping its damage all across your life. And so there's no apology, there's no like, oh, we're going to pay your legal fees. Similarly, they think like, oh, if you're talking to civil attorneys, then you're going to have like a windfall lawsuit. And man, there are people who sat on death row for years and they took 10 years going to the Supreme Court to fight against being wrongly incarcerated for 20 years. And they came out with $100,000 at the end of
mhm,
10 years, or sometimes nothing. That is
yeah,
just not how the system works. So the injustice doesn't end with being cleared. It is a fight that even as I am continuing to advocate for Marsha's Law, I am also doing this battle for accountability and trying to find answers for how and why this happened and to hopefully hold systems and corporations accountable for like how can we ensure this will never happen to somebody else again.
yeah,
And so that battle, in a lot of ways, it's only just begun. And I think that is the thing that is important for people to know. And also the effort to try and recover has only just begun because you can't do any of that grieving and processing until your own life is out of danger.
great,
Um, And so, in terms of like help, people have asked, the law isn't on the books yet, in part because I am still depending on like the self funding to travel and to meet with legislators and to get down to Georgia and to go and literally knock on doors and say, hey, we need to get Marsha's Law on the ballot, and this is why. And get together with other folks in hospice and my hospice nurse friends to talk about the need for this and to point out that even though my case was exceptional, there's a real vulnerability here, a real gap that probably should be closed. And then to go and do that state by state. And so now I'm relying on my GoFundMe for all of that. And that 100% supports my efforts to get down and get Marsha's Law on the ballot and to make that a reality. Um, so this is not like going to refill my retirement savings or anything.
right,
Like unless for some reason my GoFundMe explodes and people want to donate $1 million, it's like it's just a little bit at a time that enables me to do that work. And also, marshaslaw.org has both the links to the GoFundMe and to the petition on change.org to get that on the books. But honestly, sharing my story, sharing the fundraiser, and like getting people to understand that this could happen to them. It doesn't require you screwing up in some way or being
Yeah.
irresponsible. Um, this is something that anyone is vulnerable to, especially again, post opioid crisis in a country and age where we have so much stigma and difficulty talking about death, where people have a lot of conflict with families now sometimes, and there's a lot of eagerness to leverage blame. And I think that people are more at risk sometimes than they realize. I certainly was, because that the barrier between you and the power of the state in what should or seems to be a personal matter is often vanishingly thin. And we see
Mm.
that with immigration issues, right? But it also concerns issues of life and death and caregiving, even right down to family members being scrutinized by adult protective services if their loved one at home stops
Yeah.
eating. I've had people reach out to me being like, I'm being investigated for neglect because my dad with Alzheimer's isn't eating anymore.
Mhm.
And it's really scary how easily, again, that barrier between you and the power of the state can vanish when someone in your care or someone you love or you're close to starts to decline and die. And we have to have a real come to Jesus in this country, I think, about the reality of that and how vulnerable caregivers and people really are.
Rachel Waters, the daughter of Marsha Foster. I can't thank you enough for coming on today. And as we said, I'm going to do everything that I can to really help you fulfill these goals. They To me, this means a lot, and it's been such a pleasure and an honor to have you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rachel.
All right.